All right, let's talk about something really interesting. When you think of South Korea, K-pop, amazing food, maybe cutting-edge tech probably comes to mind. But there's this whole other side to the country, a story of faith that has a really surprising twist.
Okay, just look at this chart. In a country with a huge Christian community, one single denomination isn't just in the lead, it's completely dominant. We're talking a whopping 70% of all Protestant churches in South Korea are Presbyterian. Let that sink in. That means if you walk down the street, 7 out of every 10 Protestant churches you see belong to this one tradition. That's a phenomenon. So you gotta ask, right? How in the world did that happen? How did Presbyterianism, a branch of Christianity from 16th century Europe, get so deeply woven into the fabric of Korea that it just towers over everything else? Well, that's the puzzle we're going to solve today. And believe me, the answer is a wild ride through faith, politics, and national identity.
So, to figure this out, we've got to go back, way back, to the beginning, the late 1800s, when Protestantism first showed up on the Korean peninsula.
Now, here's where the story takes its first turn. You'd think it all started with American missionaries arriving on a boat, right? And listen, guys like Dr. Horace Allen and Horace Underwood were absolutely vital to the church's growth. But they weren't the ones who lit the first match.
That's right. The very first local church was founded in 1883 by a Korean man named Song Run Sale. He was a Bible seller, and he was part of this amazing homegrown effort to translate the Bible into Korean. This is so important because it means from day one, this wasn't just some foreign faith being imported. It was something Koreans themselves were planting and growing in their own soil.
So this new church, it just exploded. The growth was incredible. But that kind of rapid expansion was heading straight for some serious trials. The 20th century would become a crucible, a period of insane pressure that would both forge the church's identity and, as we're about to see, split it right apart.
It really came down to two massive crises. The first one came from the outside, the brutal Japanese occupation of Korea. And the second came from within, these deep, passionate disagreements over theology and what the church should be. And this timeline just lays out that turbulence perfectly. You see, after Korea was liberated from Japan in 1945, you'd think there'd be peace. Nope. Instead, all these tensions just boiled over, leading to 3 huge splits in less than 10 years. Each split created a brand new Presbyterian denomination, and here's the crazy part, this cycle of division is one of the biggest reasons there are so many Presbyterian churches today. The first big split came right out of that trauma of occupation. The Japanese government had forced everyone, including Christians, to bow at Shinto shrines. After the war, the church was completely torn apart by this. You had the resistors, many of whom had just gotten out of prison, who said bowing was idolatry, plain and simple. They formed the Kosin denomination. On the other side were the compliers, who argued they only did it to keep the Japanese from shutting the church down entirely. There was just no middle ground.
And believe it or not, just a year after that, the church split again. This time, it was about core beliefs. A group of theologians, influenced by new ideas from Europe, started to question the traditional conservative view of the Bible. They ended up forming their own denomination called Kijang, while the conservatives dug in their heels on the idea that Scripture was without error. And then, to top it all off, the third major split hits in 1959. This one was all about how to engage with the outside world. Should the Korean church join the World Council of Churches? The conservatives, who became the Hapdong denomination, were worried it was too liberal and would water down their faith. But a more moderate group, which formed Tonghap, saw it as a good way to connect with Christians globally.
Okay, so we've seen the history, the politics, the splits, but what were they actually arguing about? What were the core ideas that people were so passionate about? Let's get into what it actually meant to be a Presbyterian in Korea.
See, in Korea, the word Calvinism became this powerful identity badge. It wasn't just a vague idea. It meant you were committed to 3 very specific things: the historic Westminster Confession, the writings of John Calvin, and the 5 points of theology known as TULIP. For a lot of people, if you didn't hold to those, you weren't really part of the tradition.
But here's the thing that's so fascinating. That really rigid definition, that wasn't really the plan from the start. When the early missionaries like Charles Allen Clark put together the first creed for the Korean church, their hope wasn't for some strict exclusive doctrine. As you can see from this quote, they wanted a simple evangelical faith that could actually unite churches all across Asia.
And this table just lays it all out perfectly. You can literally see how those historical splits we talked about got baked into their theology. Look at the four main denominations that came out of those splits. Each one took a different path with that foundational Westminster Confession. The conservative groups adopted it, the moderate one adapted it, and the liberal group just rejected it entirely. Their history became their theology.
Okay, but the story isn't all about conflict and drawing lines in the sand. Something really interesting started to happen more recently. There's been this huge shift from just defending a set of rules to really digging deep into the tradition as a field of study.
You can really see it happen in 3 stages. In the early days, everything they knew about Calvinism came from the missionaries. Then, after liberation, you see the first Korean books and translations pop up. But after 1980, that's when things really took off.
And I'm not kidding, it was an absolute explosion of academic work. The first Korean scholar gets a PhD in Calvin Studies Abroad. They start their own academic society. They translate all of Calvin's commentaries into Korean. They even build a museum. Before you know it, Korea goes from being a student of this theology to a world-class center for studying it.
All right, let's bring this all home. Back to that first big question. Why are 70% of Protestant churches in South Korea Presbyterian?
Well, as you can see, there's no simple one-sentence answer. It's this incredible, complex story that's completely tied up with Korea's own modern history. It started with Korean leadership, it became a symbol of resistance against oppression, and all those passionate, painful debates actually shaped its structure. And ironically, every time the church split, it didn't really get weaker. It just created new networks of churches, all flying that same Presbyterian banner.
And what's so cool about what's happening now is this sense of maturity. A faith that for decades was defined by a pretty narrow checklist is now, thanks to all that new scholarship, exploring the huge, rich, diverse history of its own tradition. It's going from an identity marker to a deep field of study.
Which leaves us with this final thought. As this academic awakening keeps opening up their understanding of themselves, what's next? How will the world's most Presbyterian nation decide what that identity means for the future? It's a fascinating question, and honestly, it's a story that is still being written.